Hello. Welcome to Communicating Your Highly Technical Work to Non-Specialists in 3 Short Minutes with John Bandler, Aaron Kiley, and Daniel Tajik. I'm Mike Hamilton, your host for this IEEE Microwave Theory and Technique Society webcast, which is sponsored by our MTT-S Education Committee. Before we start, I'll mention a few housekeeping items. First, this presentation will be archived. A recording should be posted approximately 24 hours after we finish the presentation. We'll send all registrants an email when the archived webinar goes up so you can revisit it or share it with your colleagues. Second, we encourage questions. We're having a slightly different format for this webinar compared to past MTT-S webinars. We have multiple speakers and we'll answer questions at various points throughout the presentation today. You can submit your questions at any time during the discussion. Enter your questions in the Q&A box on the left side of the webcast window, and don't forget to click the button labeled Submit. Third, some words about the interface. You can enlarge slides by clicking on the rectangle at the top right of the slide area. You can also go into full screen mode if you desire. Refresh or reload the current page if you encounter any problems. If you're listening over your computer speakers, you'll most likely need to adjust the media player volume. Remember, you may also need to adjust your system's master volume. The icons at the bottom of the webinar window include a resource list. Clicking that link will start the process to download copies of the slides that will be presented today. Now, let's introduce our speakers. John Bandler is Professor Emeritus in the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering at McMaster University. He's an engineer, entrepreneur, innovator, researcher, artist, speaker, and author of fiction, including stage plays. You can see his YouTube channel for examples. He has published 500 technical papers, pioneered space mapping, and won several awards, including both the Microwave Application and Microwave Career Awards from IEEE MTT-S. In 1997, Hewlett-Packard acquired his company, Optimization Systems Associates, Incorporated. Dr. Bandler is also a fellow of several societies, including the IEEE and the Royal Society of Canada. He has been honored by a Queen Elizabeth II Diamond Jubilee Medal. In 2016, he was appointed Officer of the Order of Canada. His citation beginning with, "John Bandler has helped to put Canada at the forefront of microwave technology," and ending with, "He has been a mentor to numerous highly successful students and a strong advocate for the inclusion of more women in the field of engineering." He delivers workshops and mentors individuals for presentations and co-organized in 2017, the first ever 3-minute thesis competition for the IEEE International Microwave Symposium, an event he is also co-organizing for 2018. Erin Kiley is a new assistant professor of mathematics at the Massachusetts College of Liberal Arts. She's an applied mathematician whose research specializes in modeling and computational electromagnetics, including problems in microwave sintering. She received her Bachelor of Science in Math and Statistics and Bachelor of Arts in Russian from the University of New Hampshire, and her Master of Science in Applied Math, and in 2016, her PhD in Mathematics from Worcester Polytech Institute. She co-organized the 2017 first ever 3-minute thesis competition for the IEEE International Microwave Symposium, an event she is also co-organizing for 2018. Daniel Tajik received his bachelor's degree in electrical and biomedical engineering and master's degree in electrical and computer engineering from McMaster University in 2015 and 2017, respectively. His PhD research is focused on developing microwave image processing algorithms for use in medical diagnostics. His interests include applications of microwave engineering in breast cancer imaging, stroke detection, concealed weapon detection, and through-the-wall imaging, as well as antenna design for satellite communications. In 2017, Daniel won both the first place and Audience Choice Awards in the first ever 3-minute thesis competition at the IEEE International Microwave Symposium for his presentation on microwave holography, the future of medical imaging. So now it's my pleasure to turn the virtual podium over to our speakers for communicating your highly technical work to non-specialists in 3 short minutes. John?
Thanks, Mike. Thank you very much for the great introduction. And Daniel is sitting here beside me. Erin Kiley is in Massachusetts, and it's our pleasure to do this presentation. First of all, a book that I would strongly recommend possible 3-minute thesis contenders or anyone else interested in public speaking is this book by Chris Anderson, TED Talks, the official TED Guide to Public Speaking. And one of the quotations that I have from here, and which I think you should all keep in mind, the speakers who have the most impact are often those who do things differently. So to some extent, we may be presenting a kind of a formula to you. It's useful for you to understand the formula for public speaking and maybe 3-minute thesis presentations. But on the other hand, you also want to stand out. So there is some tension between following a formula and standing out by doing things differently. So do read this book if you can. It's well worth reading. This is us. That's me and Aaron and Daniel. Sorry you can't see us, but that's who we are. So here's the agenda. I'll mention a few problems with technical presentations that I've noticed over the years. We will address specifically 3-minute thesis presentations or 3-minute presentations. We'll give some examples and case studies, and I'm delighted to have Daniel here who will address his award-winning 3-minute thesis presentation in Honolulu last year. We'll play the video for you so you'll actually be able to see him and hear him, and then he will analyze his script for you, why he did certain things. We'll talk a little bit about slide composition, a little bit about theatricality, because after all, you're doing a monologue when you're doing a presentation. You can think of some theatrical tricks. There are some presentation do's and presentation don'ts as well. Now, with typical technical slides, sadly, I think most of us have experienced this or been subjected to it. They're often crammed with text. Images are often small and very difficult to see. Tables may be dense. Equations may be lengthy or complex. Flow diagrams may be, again, quite minute. Logos may be staring at you from every slide. Eventually, of course, you tune it out. But, of course, you lose a lot of real estate on your slide to logos sometimes. And, of course, the curse of too many slides is also something we've been subjected to. And, you know, typical of many technical presentations, one gets the distinct impression that the speaker is ill-prepared. The speaker often rushes through too much material, often speaks in a monotone, so there's no variation in tone that introduces some interest. And the speaker seems distant from the audience, doesn't seem to be connecting with the audience. And again, a problem we see all the time, and hopefully this is not going to happen to us today. Whether you're given 3, 20, or 50 minutes, you just about always run out of time. And anyway, and leaving little or no time for questions. Of course, I suspect that people who often leave little or no time for questions don't really want any questions, so that's one way of avoiding questions. But there's no reason if you give a 20-minute paper presentation why you have to do it in 17 minutes and 3 minutes for questions. You could interrupt your own talk and ask the audience to field questions anytime. There's no reason why you have to follow the same formula that everybody else is following. Okay, so what we want to do is what you want to do as a potential engaging speaker, you want your audience to want more of what you're saying, not less. And so that's really what you want to do. So here are some things that you really need to consider. Aspects of your speech, aspects of your slides, and aspects about you. Now, although I've put these in different columns, in a way, all these traits or attributes may apply to the speech or to you. For example, in the top right-hand corner there, you'll see first impressions. I think that's paramount. An audience makes up its mind about a speaker, I think, within the first 20 or 30 seconds of speaking. And unfortunately, that impression tends to hold for the next 3 minutes if it's a 3-minute presentation, or 15 if it's 15. It's very difficult to shake those first impressions. So you really need to be very strong in that first impression. You need to be authentic. You need to be able to sound like you believe in what you're saying to persuade people of what you are saying. You need to articulate clearly. You need to be aware of the audience. You actually have to somehow get yourself into the mind of the audience and follow yourself speaking while you're speaking to see if you're coming across clearly. Now, as far as the slides are concerned, composition is really important. I think of each slide as a kind of artistic composition, and there are ways of putting it together to make it more interesting. You should cite people. One of the biggest failures in presentations is the absence of citation. If you don't cite somebody, it means that person is either not important, or you did it yourself, or you just took it and didn't bother to cite the source. So I think citations right there and then are really important. Don't keep citations to the end of a presentation. Make sure they are appropriately distributed throughout your presentation. Now, coming to your speech, subtext is something that is really important and highly misunderstood, and something that you really should keep your eye on. Anyway, there's a lot of stuff there to talk about. We don't have time to get into much of it. You want to kindle surprise and curiosity. You want to make your audience want to hear more rather than less. And it takes practice, awareness, and empathy. Now, there are some video resources that I direct you to. Some videos on my own YouTube channel, for example. The previous webinar that Anna Kovacevic and I did last year. You see that at the bottom of your slide. And at the end of this, you'll find all kinds of other resources, and we'll come to that later. So, Mike, over to you.
Yes. Thanks, John. Just a quick note to the audience. Please definitely feel free to go ahead and submit any questions you have about this material. We definitely want to make sure we get all of your questions answered, especially for those folks who are preparing for the IMS event, as well as any other 3-minute thesis events. So right now we don't have any relevant questions. John, if you wanted to interject some other comments, that would be good. But we'll be on the lookout for answering any questions that do come up.
Right. Well, I think time suggests we should go on to Erin at this time, and there may be more questions later on once Erin takes over. So go ahead, Erin.
Okay. Hi. So I guess I just wanted to introduce the 3MT contest. Related to the idea of making your audience want more and incorporating those strategies for delivering your content in a timely and efficient way. John Bandler and I introduced the 3-minute thesis to the International Microwave Symposium in 2017 in Honolulu. That competition went quite well, and we're proud to be bringing it to you again in 2018. Now, looking at the attendees list, I see that a few of you in our audience will be competing in the 2018 3-minute thesis competition. So we'd be particularly glad to take your questions at the end of the next few slides. But for the rest of you who want some introduction to what this is all about, what we intended for the 3-minute thesis competition to do was to showcase students and young professionals who've distilled their highly complex technical research into presentations accessible to non-specialists. If you want more information about the 3MT competition, there's a URL on this slide at the IMS 2018 website where you can see that statement along with the rules. The general gist of the rules, though, as the name suggests, is that you have 3 minutes or less to present your research using an oral presentation, so no interpretive dances, no songs, supported by one static PowerPoint slide, so with no video or animations. So you have these 3 minutes to present years of complex research, to kindle excitement and curiosity among your audience members, and to make them want to hear more. And in the case of the 3-minute thesis competition, the them, or the audience members, are supposed to be generally scientifically literate people who have no technical expertise in the subject that you're presenting about. So at the 3MT competition, we will have judges who are generally scientifically literate, but who are not experts in microwaves or engineering at all. So you will have to bring your research kind of up to their level, make sure that someone who has no technical background could understand what you're talking about. So this webinar is intended to help you prepare for that, really. So what will you get by doing the 3-minute thesis? You will gain research communication skills, you'll gain confidence, you'll gain an opportunity to share your work, to explore ways in which you can share your work with people who are unfamiliar with your field. And we are offering cash prizes to the top few contestants, as ranked by our panel of judges, and possibly an audience or competitor's choice award. The research communication skills that you'll get by doing the 3-minute thesis come mostly from the practicing that you'll be doing in advance of the competition. John Bandler and I have offered to work with any of the contestants. He and I are not on the panel of judges, so we feel free to work with the contestants. You can send us your slides, send us your script, send us a video of yourself performing your script, and we'll be happy to help you and critique those in advance of the competition. So at this point, I would send it back to John, unless there are questions for us at this point. Are there questions?
So there is one question. I don't know if you want to answer it now or in the next question point, but
no, go ahead.
You want to go ahead? Go ahead. Okay. So this question is how to present pictures in the slides and talk about them. Should we include pictures for the 3-minute thesis?
Well, any images. I think the best answer I can give to that is to go and look at some of the examples. Go to the MTT IMS YouTube channel, where there are 12 videos of presentations from Honolulu, and you can get a glimpse of their slides. There are all manner of different ways of including images, many ways of doing it. The main thing I would suggest is avoid clutter, avoid too much detail and clutter. Any thoughts, Daniel?
Yeah, just quickly, I'm going to talk about my slide for a little bit. So once we get to that part of the presentation, we can go through why I chose what I did for my slide and how you should try and craft your slide and the images on your slide for your presentation.
Yeah, so you'll hear more about that shortly.
And then we have, just to kind of break the ice a little bit, we have a suggestion to do a 3-minute version of this presentation.
Oh my God! Yeah, no, that's the irony of this. It's impossible to present. You know, it takes longer to do a 3-minute presentation than it does a 20-minute presentation. Longer to prepare.
So, okay. And just another note to all the candidates who are learning about how to do this, planning on doing this, definitely, if you have any questions, now's the time to get them answered. This is a great time to interact with the designers of this, and so please don't hesitate to get your questions in.
Okay, shall I go on?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay, good. Okay, great. So one of the things that really needs to be avoided when you're engaging with the general public, or even with your peers very frequently, is to cut the jargon, and that's really very troubling for a lot of researchers. They have a very hard time cutting the jargon, and it's very important to know how certain words come across to others or to the general public. For example, there are some words that are in general usage, words like amplifier, DNA, silicon, terahertz. Now, people don't necessarily know exactly what those things mean, but they seem to be comfortable with those words. On the other hand, if you go to the extreme jargon, words like reference plane, high Q, isotropic, those are absolutely words that you have to avoid in any kind of engagement of the general public. Now, somewhere in between are these nebulous words like model, iteration, microwaves, highly misunderstood, and even words like communications, words that are used commonly, but have technical meanings and have such a variety of popular meanings that it's very difficult for those to really do a lot of work in a talk for the general public. Here are some things that really you should take note of. Things to consider. If you're doing a 3-minute presentation, I would strongly recommend no more than 120 words per minute. One of the things to do also is start early on your slide, because the earlier you start, the more likely you are to integrate what's in that slide in your speech. A big mistake is to write your speech and then think of your slide as an afterthought. It then becomes, it hasn't been properly integrated. Consider a story format. Again, if you're talking about Cinderella, you'd say, once upon a time there was somebody called Cinderella, and you obviously want to end the story with whatever happened to Cinderella. If you switch to something else, the audience will feel robbed. Rehearse with people who haven't heard you, don't know you. Don't be satisfied with people's kindness. And again, there are many, many points here. Articulate every word clearly. Use pauses for dramatic effect if you can. Don't go on in a kind of a monotone. Be in the moment. Be able to recover if something goes wrong. Anyway, a lot of stuff to consider. In the upcoming case study of Daniel Tajic's speech, and you'll hear the video, then you'll hear his analysis, look for his use of metaphor. And ask yourself also whether you believe what he's saying and how does he manage to make himself believable. Look at those gestures that he uses, purposeful gestures. How does he engage with the slide? Does he look at it? Does he not look at it? Does he just gesture and not actually check that it's there? Look for his dramatic pauses when he stops and waits for a little while. How does he make it relatable? Look at the humor that he uses. Do you like the humor? Does the humor upset you? Look at any storytelling that is involved. And of course, what's your takeaway? So audience takeaways are really quite important. At the end of a presentation, you should be able to ask someone in the audience, what was that all about? And you want to hear something positive. You don't want to hear, I have no idea what that was all about. So, over to Daniel.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, John.
Okay.
Okay, so now we're going to dive into my presentation, and I'm going to try and break it down into some smaller key aspects of what I wrote and what I prepared for in my presentation, and hopefully these aspects can help you in your preparation for the 3MT competition. So here you can see before your slide even appears on the screen at your presentation, they propose something similar to this. Of course, the first place winner and audience choice notation there wasn't there. But you can see here's my title of my presentation, Microwave Holography, the Future of Medical Imaging, and my name is there as well. And I'm going to show you my slide right now, and I'm going to let you take that in for a moment. So it's sort of a very minimalistic slide. There's some interesting things here that you may not necessarily associate with microwave holography. And so I'll talk about it during my presentation, but I think crafting your slide is very important to your overall presentation. Your slide shouldn't be a side note to your presentation. It should be something that you incorporate into your talk, and it'll make your talk come across much more impactful than if you just use, let's say, a summary slide of what you're going to be talking about. So I'm now going to play my presentation.
X-rays cause cancer. It's a little unnerving to think about, isn't it? I'm sure most of us here have had X-ray scans done at some point in our lives, and it's obvious why. The benefits of diagnosing diseases outweighs the risks of creating cancer. Yet it begs a question. Is this really the best we can do? I think there may be a better way. Microwaves. And no, I'm not talking about the kind I cook my popcorn in. I'm talking about microwave radiation, similar in power level to the Wi-Fi signals bouncing all around us. You see, in comparison to X-rays, microwaves have a clear advantage. They're non-ionizing, which means they don't cause cancer. You may be saying to yourself, that sounds amazing, but why don't we see this in hospitals right now? And the answer to that is twofold. It either takes hours to produce an image, or the image resolution is too poor to see anything. And that is where my work steps in. My name is Daniel Tajik, and I'm developing an algorithm known as microwave holography. Microwave holography is a mathematical strategy to reconstructing 2D and 3D images. It works by performing a mapping between two things. One, an estimate of how the electromagnetic waves travel inside human tissue, and two, a blurry microwave image. By mapping these two things together, I can extract a clear image. Now, there are other imaging strategies out there that perform some kind of mapping. But in order to understand how those electromagnetic waves travel, they have to use expensive computers that take hours. I do something a little bit different. I image a blueberry. Okay, that may sound a little bit ridiculous, but hear me out. Blueberries are easy to handle, and their electrical properties very closely mimic that of tissue. By measuring the electrical properties of a blueberry, I gain an understanding of how those electromagnetic waves travel inside and around tissue. This makes my algorithm run in seconds and, incredibly, appears to improve image resolution. It seems that it's actually better to rather measure how those electromagnetic waves travel inside tissue than to try and estimate how they travel using expensive computers. My goal is to bring microwave holography to clinical use in the next 5 years. So hopefully, the next time you go to get a scan done, instead of thinking, is this going to give me cancer? You're thinking, what smells like popcorn? Thank you.
Okay, so that was my talk there. Now, what was my opening line, my introduction? X-rays cause cancer. It's a little unnerving to think about, isn't it? Now, as John said earlier, introduction and your opening is everything. If you can have a very strong, impactful introduction, you can captivate your audience right away. And so what I try to do in crafting my presentation is have the audience immediately start asking questions about what I'm going to be talking about. So I walk on stage, they see that my title is Microwave Holography, they see some pictures of blueberries, and then I talk about X-rays causing cancer. It causes a lot of intrigue to be related to my talk, and that's what I really want to do. Capture their attention and try and keep their attention throughout the presentation. But just doing that initially is very important to having a strong talk overall. So I spent quite a bit of time preparing those opening 2 lines. So I'm just going to go through my talk and break it apart bit by bit, and we can look at different key aspects in what I used in my presentation, and hopefully this can help you in developing your presentation as well. So one thing you'll note throughout my entire presentation is that I use a lot of hand gestures. You noticed when I was talking about electromagnetic waves, I was waving my hand around. When I was talking about Wi-Fi signals bouncing around, I motioned bouncing around in the room. These hand gestures are key to getting your point across. So make sure your hands aren't by your sides or in your pockets or behind your back. You want to be using them actively in your presentation to keep your audience really engaged with your talk. Then you can see I have this opening, X-rays cause cancer. I broke it into fragments because it makes it more dramatic. Of course, I can just say it in the sentence, X-rays cause cancer, but it doesn't have the same impact as when I break it apart. So that was the point of doing that. Lots of pauses in my presentation. I'm not rushing through this. The goal is not to put as much information as possible into 3 minutes. The goal is to be engaging and give a good overview of what you're going to be talking about in your presentation and what your research actually is. So don't rush through things. Don't use a lot of values or numbers in your presentation. Try and be clear and concise and act as if you're having a conversation with someone. You wouldn't rush through a conversation with someone. So after my opening, I try to make it personal and relatable. Everyone has had X-ray scans done before, right? And I'm trying to connect with my audience there with my opening line. And throughout my presentation, you'll notice that I try to lead my audience into a question, right? So I open with X-rays cause cancer, and then I talk about how everyone's done X-ray scans. So the immediate question that you have in your head is, why are we doing this? Is this safe? Is there a better way to do this? And I repose that question to my audience. Is it really the best we can do? And I think having this give and take where you set up your audience to think about a question and then answering it is another way of keeping your audience engaged, and it really helped me in my presentation because I could sort of develop it with a story. I know exactly how I want to phrase my talk so that I can get the audience to think about a certain question, and then I can immediately answer it afterwards. You'll notice, again, more hand gestures. I pointed to myself a lot when I was referring to myself. And then I talk about microwaves. And as John mentioned earlier, microwaves can be a confusing word to a general population, right? So this is where I have to add clarification. I'm not talking about microwave ovens. I'm talking about radiation. And here I actually make a sort of terrible joke. And that's just sort of my personality. I like really bad jokes. And so I'm trying to tie my personality into this talk. And I think it's one of those things that you can do to really keep your presentation authentic. So if you have a certain manner or behavior or certain things you like to do, try and tie that into your talk because it's going to make it easier to come across as if you're just having a natural conversation rather than you memorizing a script and just spewing it out in 3 minutes. So we're going to continue on. You'll notice I'm trying to make this relatable with all my hand motions and what I'm talking about. One key thing here, again, is I'm trying to answer the questions that my audience is asking. So I just said, microwave radiation, the kind you cook popcorn with, right? The immediate question that an audience member can have is, are you going to cook me? And of course, that's not my goal, right? So I try to alleviate concern with a relatable metaphor here to, demonstrate that it's not something that's dangerous. Then I'm going to dive into why I think microwaves are advantageous. You see, in fact, here I say the phrase, they don't cause cancer, mimicking my opening line. And throughout my presentation, I try to use repetition to keep my points, or rather increase the impact of my points. So I opened with X-rays cause cancer, and then I get to this point and say microwaves don't cause cancer. So I'm just tying things back there, and I give this sort of incredible advantage here. Microwaves seem to be a really beneficial thing, right? But another question that you could have here is, if they're so amazing, why aren't we using them? And so I actually ask this question to my audience and then immediately answer it. And I talk about how there is a disadvantage here. So I'm crafting a story here. I'm giving pros and I'm giving cons. You don't want to just constantly give pros for your presentation because it makes it seem like it's just this amazing thing. And your audience members are always going to be looking for negative things about it, right? And if you're just giving pure negatives, your audience is going to be looking for things that are positive about it. So try and counteract that with a balance. Every time you give pros, try and give cons. And I create this dilemma where I have this problem. We have something that we can use that can solve this issue with using X-rays in our scans, but it's not ready yet. And this opens it up for me to go into my thesis and talk about how I'm going to make it ready. And I just want to highlight one thing here is how I phrase how microwave radiation imaging strategies aren't ready. I say that they take hours to produce an image or the resolution is too poor to see anything. And I'm going to tie back into that later on in my presentation. So we get to a point where I finally introduce myself. Make sure you introduce yourself. You want to be able to say your name properly. If the host has messed up your name, you want to really be clear about what your name is because you don't want people mispronouncing your name if they're trying to talk to you afterwards. And I introduce my research, microwave holography. Notice that when I said that, I slowed down. I try to enunciate it very clearly. And in fact, I'm going to repeat it right after. So I really want the point of my research to get across. So I'm using repetition and I'm using clear enunciation to do so. In this next section, I probably spent the most time developing, and this is sort of trying to break down the math into something that's relatable to an audience and is simple. And so this is where I use a lot of hand motions, a lot of gestures, and a lot of metaphors to explain my method. So you'll see, I'm using my hands to motion a mapping process that is used by my algorithm, and a lot of other hand motions are used there. And I think this is really key to explaining your overall strategy. If you have a complicated thesis or some complicated math in your talk, it's very helpful to engage with your entire body when you're going through the explanation of what's happening there. So we'll continue onwards. So I talk about other strategies that exist and why they are weak, and how I'm going to try and overcome them with my research here. And then I connect with my slides. So this whole presentation, I've just had these blueberries sitting up next to me. And once I get to the point where I'm ready to talk about them, I motion towards them, I take a look at them, and I sort of pause for a second to engage with that slide. And that was something that I felt was very critical to my work, my success as well at the IMS competition. So I finally engage with this blueberry, and of course I have to explain it. I can't just leave this weird image on the screen with no explanation. So I talk about why I use the blueberry and how it works with my research. And again, it's all about keeping it relatable, keeping it simple, and making sure your audience is engaged. Lots of more hand gestures, a lot of more emotions to really get the explanation across, to make sure that it's really understandable what I'm talking about here. So finally, I get to the conclusion of my work, which is that my algorithm can run in seconds and improves image resolution. Now you notice that was one of the dilemmas I introduced earlier. So it's this repetition again. I'm using the same words or same structure to mimic earlier parts of my presentation. And I think that's really key when you're giving a presentation, a vocal presentation, because you can't, an audience member can't look back at earlier parts of the presentation. So repetition is really key to making sure your point comes across very clearly. And it's all about keeping it relatable here. I'm going to conclude at the end with repeating my research, or the algorithm itself, microwave holography, and I'm going to talk about my vision here, what I want to do. It's really helpful if you, in these 3-minute thesis competitions, if you make it clear that you're dedicated to what you're researching. If you're just throwing something together and it doesn't really matter to you, it can come across very clearly to audience members and judges. But for me, this is something I'm very passionate about, and I'm engaging with it for many years. So it was very useful for me to just state that to the audience, right? I'm with this for the long haul, and I think that increases the overall impact of your research. Finally, I'm going to conclude this, tie this whole presentation together with another look back to an earlier part of my presentation where I talk about popcorn. I have this sort of silly line here where I'm smelling what smells like popcorn. It's just, again, trying to get my personality across in my presentation and really connect with the audience there. And that's it. That's the whole overview of my presentation. If you guys have any questions, feel free to ask them. I'll try and answer them as best I can.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. We actually have time for maybe a minute or two of questions, if anybody has questions right now.
I'll reemphasize that. We've got this point for questions, and then at the end, again, another point for questions.
Oh, yeah.
So if you have questions, go ahead and get them out there. I would like to bring up one question that we answered online, but also I think it's important for a lot of folks out there, and it has to do with being a non-native English speaker. If you want to address that, I think that would be
right. Yeah, I've worked with many non-native English speakers. Yeah, it's hard work. They will have hard work, but it's hard work to do a presentation, but it's well worth it. I think what they need is some kind of a mentor or coach that can go through the speech with them, hear them speak. If there are words that are difficult to pronounce, then if it's difficult to pronounce even after repetition, to change that word to something that is more easy for them to pronounce. Bottom line is clarity is the most important thing. I've in my own coaching of students, I've often had international students coming from quite different locations in the world, and while I'm able to speak and understand them easily and they can understand me on an individual basis, they have a hard time understanding each other, and that's something that is worth working on. It needs work. There are ways to overcome it.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to add to that, it really is just practice. If you practice enough and you really focus on making sure that you're clear in your talk and you're passionate about your work, you can definitely do well. Like, for instance, at McMaster, we had the winner last year. She was not a native speaker, and her passion really came through in her talk.
Right.
And so it's not something that you think it should disadvantage you. Try and just make sure you practice through your talk and really be passionate about what you're presenting there, and you should have no real problems.
Right. Does that clear it up, or is there another aspect to that question?
I think that's clear. Practice, practice, practice.
Right, right, yeah.
The shorter the speech, the more of the practice needed.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, so let me move on to the next topic. The idea that you're in a composition, I mean, being someone who's been involved in theater, writing plays, directing plays, watching other people direct plays and so on, I think of a public presentation with a slide as a kind of composition, and you should, which means where you stand with respect to the screen, whether you're standing to the left of it or to the right of it. There are all kinds of interesting issues relating to that. In other words, you want to imagine that the audience is seeing you and the slide and the stage and the podium as a kind of composition. Are you hiding behind the podium, or are you coming out and engaging the audience? There's a lot of aspects of this, and you can look at some of my YouTube videos where I go into some of these ideas in more detail. But the idea that you're in your composition. Here, for example, are a number of screenshots of a student that I mentored a few years ago, Tong Guo. You can search for his 3-minute thesis presentation on video on YouTube. But I think I just want to emphasize here that look at all those gestures that he's using. Putting his hands together very deliberately, pointing to himself, opening his hands out for emphasis. These are all things that you should do. And notice that he's not hiding behind a podium. Of course, in 3-minute thesis, you definitely are not supposed to do that, but there's no reason why you should be hiding behind a podium even in a regular presentation. In fact, if you want to be in what I consider to be an optimal situation, if the screen that's showing your slides, if you assume that it's center stage, then what you should preferably do is to stand downstage right. So that means looking at the screen from the audience's point of view, standing to the left of the screen. Using your left hand to gesture at the slide, I think puts you in a more powerful situation. Again, we don't have time to discuss this in detail, but you'll find this on some of the videos that you can find on my YouTube channel. In particular, a video of a workshop that Michelle Ogrodnik, Daniel Tajik, and I did just a couple of weeks or so ago. You can find that on YouTube, and we go into the where to stand in somewhat more detail. Again, you want to engage with the audience, so walk towards the audience. If you're hiding backstage or behind a podium, you're not really engaging. You have a barrier. And again, engage through open arms, outstretched, palms up. That gives the impression that you have nothing to hide. And ask the audience questions. Now, these could be rhetorical questions, but if you're asking questions, look at someone, point at someone, and ask them a question. Now, in 3-minute thesis, you're not going to get an answer, but still the idea of asking questions is another way to engage the audience. So I think with that, I'd like to hand this over to Erin.
Hi, yeah, I'll be talking about first impressions for the next few slides. So I think it's important to point out here that for talks, not just for 3-minute talks, but for any presentations that you give, first impressions occur at the start and sometimes before you even begin speaking. As you stumble onto the stage, as you try and hook up your microphone, as you try and load up your slide deck, make sure that the audience has the impression that you know what you're doing and that you're confident in your position there. For manuscripts, however, for articles that we write or for Or for conference papers, indeed, if you'll be attending IMS, the International Microwave Symposium, you'll have written a conference paper. For manuscripts, the first impressions of the audience can be anywhere in the paper because the audience chooses where to begin reading. They might choose to have a look at your reference list first. They may choose to have a look at your figures or at your conclusions first. So really, this is the difference between a talk and a manuscript, is that with talks, you can much more carefully control the audience's first impression of you. So your audience and your judges during your 3MT talk will hear your host's introduction of you. They'll see you stumble onto the stage. They'll be biased before your first word. They may ignore, they may dislike your slide. They may absorb the audience reactions to you. And they'll consider your relative performance, that is, relative to the other competitors or relative to the other presenters that they've heard that day. So these are all things that you should be keeping in mind as you prepare for your talk. Make sure that your host knows how to pronounce your name and the university or company that you're affiliated with. Make sure that you know how to get to the stage. Make sure that you know how to load up your slide deck properly. So some things to keep in mind as you watch some of the 3MT videos that are posted on the MTT Society's YouTube channel, or as you watch any other 3MT videos that you might find online as you prepare. So the videos that you see are not live. In creating these videos, the videographer and the editor all made creative choices. For example, is the slide visible on that video? At what points during the video, and for how long is that slide visible? The audience can see the entire picture. The audience sees the entire stage. They see things that are off to the side of the stage. They see the projection screen where the slide is. So do keep in mind that that these videos that you're seeing online are not live and may give you a much different impression than they gave the audience and the judges when they were live. And this includes first impressions. So I guess at this point, we would take a few more questions. Maybe we have time for another question or two before going back to John. Any more questions?
Sure. I think this one was answered online, but I think it's important to bring it up again as well. So this is an audience member question. Do you have suggestions on how to better present your idea to an obviously aggressive audience?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. It really comes down to you understanding your audience and engaging with them properly in terms of what kinds of questions you expect them to be asking themselves during your presentation. So, for me, it was sort of easy. I was talking about microwaves, and I'm aware of people thinking about microwave ovens, so I was able to answer that question. For you sort of have to set yourself up when it comes to those sort of aggressive members, audience members, in terms of how you can get them to ask the questions that you want to answer. So a lot of the times when we craft these presentations, we think more about, how do we get our information across? How do we explain it? But we really should view it from the perspective of the audience member. And so if you can craft your presentation in that way, where you're sort of answering the questions as they come to the minds of your audience members, you've done a good job in terms of your presentation.
Great. Should we move on now?
I think you can if you want to. That's fine. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we can have more questions closer to the end here. One of the things I'd like to emphasize is this idea of not being able to backtrack. One of the biggest mistakes that I've seen with the McMaster University 3-minute thesis candidates right now that I'm working with, we have our competition actually tomorrow and the day after, is that they sort of fail to realize that the audience hasn't heard that speech before. They haven't heard that candidate before. They don't know what the next word is that is going to be, articulated. So you have to imagine that you're reading a script, moving forwards, constantly moving forwards, never being able to backtrack. So if somebody loses their train of thought or a momentary lapse and misses something, then perhaps the whole talk might be compromised. And so you really have to be able to put yourself into the mind of the audience and where would they find difficulties with your presentation, etc. Now, we've already mentioned the importance of being memorable and making sure that your name is remembered. Again, sometimes we have a complicated name, not easy to pronounce. You really have to do something to make sure that people can introduce you to somebody else by name and not stumble over it. And don't let yourself be defined by the person who's introducing you. So, we're coming close to the end here. Important aspects of the presenting to the general public, non-experts, for example, you have to be able to communicate your expertise, indicate your sources, your citations. I think it's really important to indicate your commitment to the long haul. If they feel that you're committed to this particular subject, they will take you more seriously than if they feel that this is just a means to an end, and after this project is finished, that you'll be doing something else. And, indicate how you got to where you are. What's your journey? How did you get there? What sort of setbacks did you have? Drama is interesting because people have setbacks and they overcome them. So indicate things that you'll overcome. What's your vision for the future of the particular work that you're doing? And definitely communicate your humanity. Make sure that your passion shows. If you're not passionate about the subject, then why on earth should the audience be passionate? So that's important. I'd like to acknowledge people that have helped me significantly or helped us significantly over the last year or so. My good friend John Vlachopoulos, he's a chemical engineer. Anna Kovacevic, with whom I worked last year, and Barb Frenessy, who has also seen some of my presentations and given me a lot of feedback. So this is my acknowledgement page. Moving on before we ask for questions, by all means, go to the PDF that's attached to this presentation and click on some of the links. You'll see quite a number of them, references to previous 3-minute thesis, do's and don'ts, and presentations, and so on. Tong Guo, we talked about him earlier, the double rotor motor. There's an online video of his. Anna Kovacevic's 3-minute thesis presentation. A couple of versions of it, and of course Daniel Tajik. And do go to the IMS YouTube channel. You see that at the bottom of your screen now. There's 3 articles in Microwave Magazine that you can see at the top of this slide that Aaron and I wrote relating to the IMS competition for last year and coming up again for this year. Again, more material that you can find on YouTube. And finally, a couple of books that you might like to read, including the book by Chris Anderson, which I thoroughly recommend. So we've sort of come to the end of the formal presentation. We're now open to questions on any relevant topic until we run out of time. So thank you very much.
That's wonderful. Thank you to everybody here, to John, Aaron, and Daniel. I think this was very informative. We do have some time for a few more questions. Certainly, we can entertain any other questions from the audience. Now's the time to get those questions in. We do have a few in the queue here that we can address. So one of them is how to look confident on stage. That's always an important one.
Yeah, it's definitely tough. I think it really just comes down to a sort of state of mind. You have to tell yourself you're confident over and over and over again. And when you do it enough, you start actually feeling confident. And I remember when I was waiting for my presentation, and when you're waiting to go up on stage, you sit in a queue with all the other competitors. And you sort of look around and you see everyone is extremely nervous, right? Some people are sweating. Some people are tapping their foot really fast. You just got to remember, everyone's nervous here, but I'm just going to go up. I'm going to present. I've practiced this however many times. It'll be fine. I'm going to be fine. I'm confident. And you go up there and you present, and that's really all it comes down to, right? Like, just continually tell yourself you're confident, and overall, over time, you'll slowly gain some. There's some things that you can try and do to sort of appear confident, and I think Erin responded to this in her answer as well. But it really comes down to your posture too. If you stand up straight and you smile, and you enunciate very clearly, and if you know your presentation well, and maybe you stutter through your presentation, but you pick it up very easily, those all come across as very confident aspects. So basically, if you know your presentation extremely well and you're able to pick yourself up after maybe making a mistake or two, you'll come across as confident.
Yeah, and there's another thing that I think is really, really important. Be the first to arrive in your venue. We've all had the experience when we arrive at a gathering of people, when we're not the first, when we arrive late, we always feel a little bit left out. If we arrive early and other people come in later, it sort of empowers us. What I do myself, if I have a really important presentation to make, I try to get to the venue the day before. I will try to go into that location. I will go to the stage. I'll stand at the podium. I'll look around. So getting there really early and getting used to the atmosphere and being early to arrive, I think, is quite important in establishing confidence. Anything from your side, Erin?
I would iterate what Michael said about knowing your material inside and out. If you know your material very, very well, then a presentation is just a conversation. I mean, you're just talking to people about things. And if you are good at conversing with people in general, if you are relaxed enough, then as long as you know your material, I think that this is really the biggest factor. And again, knowing your material and knowing your presentation inside and out allows you to get to the facility early enough. It allows you the luxury of that time beforehand where you can relax, scope out the stage area, figure out how your microphone works and things like that. You're not rushing at the last minute trying to memorize things. You're not rushing to edit your slide deck, for example. If you've prepared very well and you know your content inside and out, then you have the time to relax and treat it like a conversation. That's all it is.
Any more questions? Huh?
Yeah, we probably have time for one more. Erin, do any of these stick out? I know you're looking at these questions as well. Do any of them stick out in this last minute? I can pick one.
I like this one. What clues in the audience should you look for to measure your effectiveness? One of the things that I would say that you should look for in the audience is look and see if they're looking at you. Look to see, you want to see that not all of them are playing with their phones or, have their laptops out or are preparing their own slides because they're on stage next, etc. You want to see people who are attentive and engaged. And, if you go through a, relatively more technical part of your talk and you see a lot of quizzical looks on people's faces, slow it down a little bit. I mean, don't be afraid to backtrack or to repeat something you just said or to try to explain in a different way. Really presentations are about engaging your audience. And if your audience is not engaged, then you've got to backtrack a little bit, right? I mean, as I said, this is kind of a conversation, right? When you're giving a presentation from the stage, the main participation that you have from their audience is the projection that they give, right? The emotion they're showing on their faces or through their body language. You don't want to see them slumped down in chairs and paying attention to something else.
Completely agree. And that's a clue in and of itself of just even asking that question that they're on the right track. Well, okay, so ladies and gentlemen, I'm afraid we are actually out of time now. There are a few more questions here, and the presenters will follow up with those unanswered questions offline. As we said earlier, this session will be archived on the Society website at MTT.org, and all the registrants will get an email reminder with the website address when that's up and available. For the attendees that would like to receive PDH credits, please follow the link in the webcast view and use the code that's provided on the last slide of this presentation, so the code that's being shown here on the current slide. And once again, I'd like to give out special thanks to John, Aaron, and Daniel for this incredibly useful presentation, not just for 3-minute thesis, but just presentations in general. I think all the advice is fantastic. And special thanks to our audience for joining us today. We hope you found today's event valuable and that you'll return for future IEEE Microwave Theory and Technique Society webcasts. Thank you and have a great day.